Finally happened, folks. Our beloved Georgia Bulldogs lost a college football game for the first time in 2 calendar years. How many of us can say that? How many people alive right now can say that? Sorry, there's some dust flying around. How many people alive can say that their college football team didn't lose a game in 2 calendar years? 29 straight. Very few people alive can say that. You can say that if you're a dog fan. But I'm also the maddest I've ever been, and we'll get to that. But first I want to dive into the positives. The first thing I want to mention is Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers, who have likely played their last SEC game. We'll see about the bowl game, but we expect these 2 young men to move on. What a couple of warriors, a couple of just the damnedest of good dogs. And the fight that they put up on Saturday, I'll be honest, I didn't really believe the hype that they were as injured as they were. Bowers, 5 receptions, 53 yards. Ladd McConkey, 3 receptions, 38 yards. They're making plays in the fourth quarter of that game, despite getting their ankles rolled up, despite limping around. I mean, Ladd was limping after every play. Still ran some of the most crisp routes I've seen. But they were trying to beat him up, and he kept fighting. So just so much respect for those guys. So glad they were a part of this program, and just really excited to see what they're going to do at the next level. I think they'll be really successful. The defense, I've heard a lot of people talk about the defense, and in some cases blaming the defense for playing poorly. And there were some plays that Alabama got the better of Georgia, the better of Georgia's defense. But the defense allowed less than 3 yards per carry and less than 200 passing yards. It's the lowest yardage output that Jalen Milroe has had all year. The defense was, and zoom in on me here now, the defense was elite on Saturday. They could have made some more plays, yes. There's a couple of interceptions they could have had. There's a couple of stops that they needed to make that they weren't able to make. But the defense played at an elite level despite having Jamon Dumas-Johnson out, despite Smile Mondon not having been healthy for the entire month of November. I think he's been battling through injuries all season, despite not having Julian Humphrey, who's probably our second best cover corner. And I was just really impressed. Listen, our defensive line, Georgia's defensive line is nowhere near what it was last year or the year before. But those guys fought. Yeah, I know we've all seen the film of Nazir Stackhouse getting hip-tossed in a double team, but he didn't just quit. He didn't walk off with his tail between his legs down the sideline. These guys were fighting. And Georgia does not have elite edge play right now. We're not elite up the middle, and we had true freshmen getting most of our snaps at linebacker, along with an injured junior in Smile Mondon. Safety play, I think Georgia has the best safety play in the country, and they did a great job of limiting Alabama. And I'll get to it in a little bit, but we're obviously going to talk about the Isaiah Bond catch, 4th down conversion that wasn't probably not a catch, or definitely was not a catch. And if not for that, Alabama only scores 20 points, which is their lowest output of the year outside of the South Florida game where they did some weird stuff at quarterback and tried to start Tyler Buckner. So the defense was elite. If you think it wasn't, go argue with a brick wall, because they were. But, yeah, they could have made some more plays, but given the defense did what it needed to do to win the game. Now to the part that some of you are going to agree with. You're going to agree with it too much, and a lot of you are not going to like, and you're going to think I'm an idiot. And you're going to get mad at me because I'm just going to read you some factual information. You're going to yell at the screen or maybe turn off the video and get mad at me. I do not care. I don't care if this upsets you. Here it is, a prepared statement. I do not think that Mike Bobo is an elite offensive coordinator and play caller. Now, guys, a lot of you don't agree with that statement. That's okay. You don't have to agree with it. What you do have to do, if you want to live with us in reality, is you have to stop acting I don't have a point. Because I have 15 years of receipts, and we can go back through them. And you can talk to me about the 2014 season and how Georgia averaged 41 points a game. And I'm going to say, yeah, I don't care how many points per game Georgia averaged, because against our two biggest rivals, Georgia Tech and Florida, in that season, Georgia scored 20 points against Florida in a loss and 17 points against Georgia Tech. If not for a defensive touchdown, Georgia would have lost that game in regulation, but we ended up losing in overtime. So you can average a lot of points per game without, if you lay 2 or 3 eggs a season offensively and lose games, it doesn't matter that you averaged 41 points a game. It doesn't matter that you scored 50 against Kentucky. It's not going to help you. Scoring 50 against Kentucky didn't help us on Saturday. Scoring all those points against Ole Miss didn't help us on Saturday. Now, I'm not saying that Mike Bobo sucks or that he's a bad coach or that he should be fired. Okay? Smart people can say dumb things. I've seen a lot of smart people on Twitter who I respect a lot, who cover Georgia football, blaming players. It's ridiculous. You cannot blame players. It is the coach's responsibility to have the players prepared to execute their game plan. And if the players are not executing their game plan, yes, the players have responsibility, but the ultimate responsibility is on the coach to have the kids ready to play. And that's just how it works. So if your first instinct is, well, this player should have done this and he didn't, and so it's the player's fault, it's not the coach's fault. No, the coach his job is to prepare the player to execute the game plan. So when the player doesn't do that, ultimately the blame falls back on the coach. Now, Kirby Smart is the head coach. Kirby Smart promoted Mike Bobo. So yes, Kirby Smart shoulders the majority of the blame here. The difference is Kirby Smart is a defensive coach. Yes, he has his hands in the offense, but when you have a defensive head coach, the offensive coordinator becomes that much more important. Todd Monken was very important to Georgia's back-to-back title runs with Stetson Bennett. And when you have Mike Bobo stepping in to that same spot, you're elevated. And it's your job. Alabama's the only elite opponent, the only team that Georgia has faced all season that can match up with them talent for talent. Nobody else, the second best team Georgia played this year, and this team isn't even close from a talent perspective. The second best team Georgia played was Missouri. Missouri's a good team. They've had a great year, but they don't even compare from a talent perspective to Alabama. So if you can't score points in these games, then it absolutely does not matter at all how many points you scored against Kentucky, how many points you scored against Ole Miss. Georgia, okay, I'm going to say this. Georgia had exactly four games this season where I would say the offense was elite. 0 for 5 in September, by the way. The first 5 games, the offense was not elite in any of them. But you got 2 G5 teams and an FCS team, so it's like, all right, we're working on stuff. But then you play South Carolina, and the offense doesn't look good. And then you play Auburn, and the offense looks good. Doesn't look good. You're losing at halftime of both of those games. And I'm going to tell you guys something. Under the previous administration and Bobo's last stint, Georgia would have probably lost those 2 games. So you're sitting there at 10-2 at the end of the year wondering what if. Those are 2 of the games that I'm talking about. Those are Bobo games. Those are games that you could lose. But Kirby Smart has come in. The administration started spending money on recruiting. We have enough talent and depth to overcome those deficits now, which is what happened. But Georgia very well could have been 10-2. If it was up to the offense, they would have been 10-2 this year in the regular season. 10-2 is not bad. If you're fine with 10-2, then good. I guess we're right where we need to be. I wanted a 3rd championship this year, and I think the rest of you did as well. So 4 games out of the 13 games were elite. Kentucky, where you scored 51. The Florida game was elite offensively. Ole Miss was elite offensively, and Tennessee was elite offensively. 4 out of 13. Yeah, they averaged like 38 point something points. I don't have it pulled up right now. But if you're only elite for 4 games, that's not really that good to me. That is less than a third of the games where you're operating at a high level offensively. Georgia Tech was not good offensively. Missouri was highly mediocre offensively. And then we already talked about the games in September that we frankly just did not look good on offense. Now, I think Mike Bobo is a good man. I think he's a good quarterbacks coach. And I love him on staff at Georgia. I actually think Georgia probably can win a championship with Mike Bobo. I just don't think it's our best foot forward. I don't think he gives us the best chance to win a championship. Now, people are always asking, well, who would you get? Who do you want to get? I don't know who I would get as an offensive coordinator. I just know that forget about who Mike Bobo is. Imagine for a second that there's an offensive coordinator vacancy in Athens. And the person that they brought in, you've never heard of them. But let's say they were at another SEC school. And they hadn't been there the last 9 years. It's like, well, they were the head coach at a G5, and they really didn't do all that good there. But then they went to South Carolina, and they did okay there. They actually tried to retain this offensive coordinator candidate there, but he decided to go to Auburn. And then he goes to Auburn and he gets fired there, so now he's on your support staff and he just gets promoted. But 9 years prior, he had a really good season. If you're just talking about points per game, if that's all you care about is points per game, which we've already established is not an end-all, be-all statistic. He had a really good season. He actually had 3 straight really good seasons in points per game. Now, yeah, did his offense cost the team games during those seasons? Absolutely. But they averaged a lot of points per game. If that candidate had that resume without any connection to this school, without any relationships with the University of Georgia, they're not even going to get an interview. Do you understand how little of a chance that resume has elsewhere? Let me ask you this. Who else is trying to hire Mike Bobo away from Georgia? I think Mississippi State reached out in the offseason. Maybe a lot of people didn't reach out because they knew he was going to be promoted. I don't know. Around the SEC, do you know who cared that Georgia hired Mike Bobo? You know who was worried about that? Exactly no one that I'm aware of. Now, that doesn't mean that he's not good. It doesn't mean that he's not a good coach. I actually think he's a very good man. This is a guy who rejected raises at Colorado State because he didn't feel like the team was performing up to the level that he would deserve a raise. So he absconded the raise, and I think I used that word right. And I respect that. And like I said, I think he's a good man. You know, it doesn't make him a bad person. I mean, I couldn't coordinate the offense at Georgia. I don't think that makes me a bad person. I'm just not qualified for the job. But let's not blame players. That's silly. You know, if you could blame players, no coach would ever get fired. I mean, Jim Coley would still be the offensive coordinator. Yeah, because if Jake Fromm would have just thrown the perfect pass and the receiver would have just caught it and ran past everybody, then Georgia would have averaged 50 or 60 points a game. That's not how it works. Okay, if this player's missing blocks and what, you can do that with every single play. The play where everyone's trying to blame players is, of course, the fumble on the 10-yard line. I think Chris Hayes, if you are aware of him on Twitter, I think he calls himself Hayes Bringer, does a great job of breaking down plays. He breaks down, the play that Dylan Bell fumbled on is sort of a reverse, like a mesh fake handoff with a reverse. Georgia's run variations of that all year. But in this particular case, you had the mesh, and then it's like a little toss, and Beck is trying to toss it awkwardly. And the ball gets fumbled on the 10-yard line. Yes, could the players execute that play better? Of course, and I'm sure they did in practice. But they didn't. And regardless of whether you want to blame players on that play, there were a lot of other plays in the game that did not work. Okay, the first drive was great, put together a couple of drives in the fourth quarter, but after the first drive in the first quarter, for about 3 quarters after that, just the offense was just inept. Yes, they lost Amarius Mims. That's a big blow. Xavier Truss is not the level of player that Amarius Mims is. But he's still a guy who can play. He's a guy who, yeah, he gets beat sometimes, but he's not – it shouldn't shut the offense down in the way that it did on Saturday. There has to be a counterpunch, and there just seemed to be no counterpunch. Georgia threw their fastball, and Alabama swung and missed the first time. Then they started hitting it, and that was it. That's the only pitch Georgia seemed to have offensively. I'm not blaming injuries. Brock Bowers, I know, was hobbled. Ladd McConkey was hobbled. Mims was out. Alabama had injuries too. Georgia had injuries on defense. Injuries are part of it. We're not going to start doing the Jamison Williams, John Mechie deal that Alabama did. Oh, the game doesn't count because we had injuries. Injuries happen. That's just part of it. I think that the offensive play calling could be improved. Maybe Georgia couldn't find anyone better. I don't know. Alabama ended up landing Tommy Rees. I don't think he's a very good offensive coordinator, which is another reason why this loss is so frustrating, because I don't think they have good quarterback play at Alabama, and I don't think they have a very good offensive coordinator. So this is a game that I believe Georgia should have won. Just a couple of names. People ask me about names. Buster Faulkner. I know he actually had some rough games this year, and maybe he just knows how to call plays against Georgia, but he had our defense's head spinning with Georgia Tech's players. Georgia Tech has some players, but not the level of players that Georgia has, especially not in the trenches. Thomas Brown is with the Carolina Panthers. He's sort of I don't know if he's interim head coach, but he's still with the team. The head coach got fired. Thomas Brown's a former Georgia running back. These are just two Georgia guys. I don't know. There's probably a long list of guys who I've never even heard of who are really good play callers. Would like to see, I don't think it's going to happen, but would be very interested to see somebody like that get a shot, maybe in a co-OC role. But I think it's just pie in the sky. Because I don't think it's going to happen. I think it's probably going to be a similar staff to what we had last year. We'll see who leaves and what kind of turnover there is. But once again, the reason I'm the maddest I've ever been is because officiating was a factor. Same with both 2018 games that I won't get into. We've probably talked about that on other episodes. And when I'm evaluating officiating, which I have been doing over the last couple of years, just out of spite, I try not to get too far in the weeds with holds and pass interference, because those can get really subjective. Was it a hold? Actually, I thought they called a hold against Alabama that was a really iffy call. I see why they called it, but it just seemed like something they could probably let go on one of their offensive linemen. But the Isaiah Bond fourth down catch right before halftime was not a catch. The ball hit the ground and moved. He did not complete the catch. The officials did not review it, or at least they didn't stop the game to review it. And Alabama ended up scoring a touchdown. 2 plays later, 7 points, in a game that they won by 3. So once again, in a Georgia-Alabama game, officials have affected the scoreboard in a way that may have affected the outcome of the game. And it is just really difficult to see that happen once again. I don't think there's a conspiracy. I'm really trying hard not to buy into the idea that there's some sort of Bama conspiracy where the officials just will screw the other team over whenever they play Alabama. I don't think that's happening. I think that officials are really out there doing their best, but they screwed this up, and it may have cost Georgia the game. I mean, that's a tight game. A touchdown is a big deal in that game. And one of the most ridiculous fairy tale responses I get when I bring up officiating is, well, every team deals with officiating. Yeah, every team deals with bad officiating, but the idea that it affects both teams equally in a given football game is ridiculous. Of course it doesn't. If one team has 5 blown calls against it and they lose by 2 points and the other team only had 1 or 2 blown calls, well, then the team that lost get screwed over. Georgia has gotten screwed by the refs, even in the Peach Bowl last year. I know everybody thinks that Javon Bullard was targeting on Marvin Harrison, but he wasn't, and the officials explained why he wasn't. They are correct. There was actually a lot of calls that went against Georgia. Kirby Smart had to call a timeout to keep the officials from allowing Ohio State to run a play with 12 men on the field. The officials just missed that. It's also a fake punt and may have saved the game for Georgia. So I did not like at all. The officiating was just bad. They also called a horse collar on Xavier Sori. And I understand why they called it initially, but when you look at it, he pulls the guy down by the front of his shoulder pads. His right hand is kind of in the horse collar area, but the left hand is making the tackle. It's a 15-yard penalty. That's just not a horse collar. It's not what it is. They're missing face masks against Georgia. Those aren't subjective. And I kind of understand the horse collar, understand what they called it. And even going back to the Auburn game, an Alabama player ran down on a kickoff and about took off the Auburn kick returner's head, tackled him by his face mask, jerked his body the other way. It looked like it could have broken his neck. No call. I don't get it. Also, offensively, Georgia scored the same number of points as Auburn did. Auburn can't throw a forward pass. So just to circle back on the offensive game plan not being effective against Alabama. And even talking about injuries, even with injuries, Georgia is better offensively than Auburn. They both still scored 24 points against Alabama. So you tell me what the problem is. Is it scheme or is it talent? Georgia had the talent, just the scheme wasn't there. Transfer portal. I did want to say this really quickly. So they didn't stop after the Isaiah Bond catch, but Arian Smith's catch that was a clear, complete pass, and Georgia's trying to run hurry up now. I have a feeling that the officials got chewed out for not stopping play in the first half because they're like, hey, this Isaiah Bond dropped this fourth down pass. You guys screwed up. So then in the second half, it seems like they're trying to make up for it, so they stop play on a Georgia deep ball. Arian Smith catches it, falls on his back. It doesn't look at all like it could be incomplete. They stop play. It stops Georgia from running hurry-up offense, which is what they were trying to do as a strategy to keep the defense on their heels. So again, officials trying to do the right thing and just can't do the right thing for screwing up. And I don't know what the problem is there. Transfer portal. Georgia's after some guys. Georgia's losing some guys. I wrote an article and posted it on my personal blog because these things can get a little bit iffy sometimes with regard to whether or not, if the administration at Georgia, if it's posted on the site, they don't like you to speculate on who is transferring and who's hanging around. So I posted this on my personal blog, and I'm going to see if I can actually get this to pull up right now so I can make sure I'm giving you guys up-to-date information. Nope, that's not it. Okay, published. There it is. Nope, that's still not it. All right, Darius Smith in the portal. That is one that I expected to be in the portal. And there's also Austin Blaskey's in there. I'm just going off the top of my head right now. Jackson Meeks jumped in the portal. Jonathan Jefferson looks like he's going to be looking elsewhere. Why won't that not pull up? I know that I published this. Anyway, Georgia's going to lose some guys in the portal. I'm trying to think of anybody else off the top of my head. I'm pretty sure I'm missing one or two. But there haven't been as many as I expected. And I'm not going to speculate too much on who's going in and who's out. But I am going to be updating as more and more potentially enter the portal. Then I'm going to update. I'm going to update my post to see who I was right about, who went in unexpectedly. Okay, here we go. Oh, Brock Vandegrift. That's the biggest one that was fairly expected. Jackson Meeks, Austin Blasky, C.J. Madden's another one who I had down on my list. Darius Smith, Jonathan Jefferson, and I think that's it for now. I expect some other guys to probably enter at some point. I'm not really sure what the window is right now, but that's less than I was expecting to leave. So I think that's maybe good news. Guys want to stick around, want to stick it out. We'll also see who decides to go to the NFL. Guys like Smile Munden, Jamon Dumas-Johnson. Are they going to, they're draft eligible now. Carson Beck is a big one. There's rumors that he is trying to negotiate an NIL deal with the school to come back. I've heard $1 million. I've heard $4 million. Maybe they split the difference. I don't know. It's not my money, so I don't really care. There's also guys in the portal that Georgia is looking at. I believe Humphreys is the kid's name. There's actually 2 wide receivers from Vanderbilt they're looking at. Maybe Walter Nolan, the defensive lineman from Texas A&M. If he jumps in the portal, it was announced that he was going to get in there. Georgia's definitely going to try to bolster this defensive line because, again, it's not bad last year, but it's just not the level that Georgia's used to having. Last thing I'm going to talk about is the college football playoff. Georgia's not in it. I'm not going to make a case for Georgia being in it, even though I think the officiating was bad, and I think it potentially affected the game outcome. Ultimately, I think Georgia could have still won that game. I think they should have still won that game. The thing that gets me is that they probably would have won it if the officials did their job, and that just is probably going to stick in my craw forever. And I'll never let Alabama fans forget it. They will never lord this over me as a legitimate victory, ever. And they're probably going to talk about wide receiver injuries for the end of time from 2021, and that's fine. We'll go back and forth on that because I'll have my list of injuries. I've got them ready to go. George Pickens out, who's maybe better than both of those receivers combined. But I'm not making a case for Georgia. They didn't win the game. I have no problem with them not being in the college football playoff. Florida State, on the other hand, got hosed. You have 3 undefeated teams: Washington, Florida State, and Michigan. Georgia would be power ranked ahead of Florida State and Washington. So if you're putting the best 4 teams in, Georgia would be in there. I'm not making a case for them to be in there. I'm just saying if the criteria, like the college football playoff says, is to get the 4 best teams, then Georgia would be in there over Washington. There's no question about that. But they left Florida State is an undefeated ACC Power 5 conference champion that has been left out of the playoff because their quarterback got injured. A lot of people on Twitter are pointing out all these Cincinnati Bengals have lost their starting quarterback, Joe Burrow. There's been a lot of quarterback injuries, and a lot of people on Twitter are saying, well, I guess these teams aren't allowed to go to the playoff now because their quarterback got injured. It's just it's ridiculous. Everybody's saying, oh, well, conference expansion will help this. Conference expansion is still not necessary. Just because the CFP committee is a bunch of morons sitting in a room making decisions based on advertising revenue doesn't mean that we need a 12-team playoff. Guess what? The people who gave you Florida State outside of the top 4 as an undefeated team, they're the same folks that are giving you the 12-team playoff. And you think that's going to be a good product from the same people. We didn't need a 12-team playoff. There's 3 undefeated teams, and then you choose from the 1-loss teams. It's either Georgia, Alabama, Texas, Ohio State. It's one of those teams, and whoever gets left out, I think Georgia should have been. If I'm getting a vote, it's Texas. Texas beat Alabama. Alabama beat Georgia, and Ohio State. I think they would have a case. They just hadn't played a very strong schedule. So. Of course, neither is Michigan, but Michigan beat Ohio State. So I think that would be fair. But the 3 undefeated teams should have been in. And Alabama in no world should Alabama be in ahead of Florida State or Texas because they both lost. Florida State did not do that. And I don't care, they had their third-string freshman quarterback playing against Louisville in the ACC championship game. Rodemaker was going to be back by the playoff. So it's just complete nonsense that you would leave an undefeated team out. And I think the committee is a joke. And the fact that we even have a committee is a joke. If you're going to do a 14 playoff, I'm for that. I hate the BCS system. The BCS had just 2 teams, often had split titles. I mean, nothing's dumber than split titles. So we got to do away with any system that gives you 2 different national champions. I mean, the 12-team playoff, yeah, I guess it would have solved the problem for this year, but the same people that are solving the problem are the ones that created it. That's not generally a good formula. It's kind of how the government operates. It creates problems, and then they say, here's the solution to the problem that we created. But Florida State did get hosed. If it was me, if I was Florida State, I know this has been put out there, but I think it's a good idea. I would show up to the Orange Bowl. I would go through warm-ups, and then I would just, right before kickoff, I would just tell them, hey, we're not playing. If y'all don't value the season that we just put forth, the effort that we just put forth, putting our bodies on the line to go undefeated, if y'all don't value that, then I'm not. Why would we put our bodies on the line against Georgia, who is the other team in the game, by the way? Why would Florida State risk their health against Georgia that has a bunch of freaks? Not that Florida State couldn't compete, but you know, it would be a dogfight if both teams are putting forth A+ effort. Why would you go play in this game? Players don't really get a slice of the money of the bowl payout. In fact, they're not allowed to get any of that money. Now, you get some stuff. There are perks for playing in a bowl game. But if I was them, I would show up and I would just sit out. And I would let those executives lose that money, lose that ad revenue, scramble. They could throw a rerun of Heidi on TV for all they want. You could throw some cartoons up, but we ain't playing. Or you can just leave the cameras on and they can just show an empty field. You got to pay the broadcasters. You got to pay the advertisers. Good luck. That would be the biggest FU to the committee, to the executives that are in charge of making these decisions that they could possibly give, and I would fully support them doing that. And I hope they do it. I really hope they do. I don't really care. It's good to be in a bowl game as far as Georgia goes. It's good to be in a bowl game. I don't care anything about the Orange Bowl. I would maybe go to it. I can't. I have a previous engagement, but if you have an opportunity to go, yeah, it's a great trip. Tickets will probably be like $20. I'm sorry to say that I do hope Florida State sits out. It's nothing personal, but South Beach it's nice. Miami's really spread out. I haven't spent a lot of time down there, but I've been down there some. But yeah, Florida State, man, they really got hosed, and I don't know. I mean, I'm pretty mad about the Alabama game and the officiating and the poor offensive game plan. I couldn't imagine my team going undefeated. This happened to Auburn in 2004, I think. But at least with the BCS, there's only 2 teams. So there was 3 undefeated teams. Auburn got left out. So the whole point of the 4-team playoff is to not have that happen. That should never, ever, ever, ever happen. I don't care what any Alabama fan tells you about how they should have been in because BCS formulas would have still had Florida State out or whatever. I don't care. Any formula that would have had Florida State out is incorrect. I don't care about Vegas odds. It doesn't matter. They went undefeated. They beat everybody they played. They should have been in the tournament. But that's going to do it for us today, guys. Thank you for joining the Overdog Podcast. I'm Craig Lawson, and we will catch you next time. Go Dogs.